Write down 1 to 3 words that reflect your identity. So for example, you could say that you're a teacher, you're a musician, able-bodied, however you define yourself, write down 1 to 3 words, and I want you to hold on to that. Sorry to give you instructions right away. Write down 1 to 3 words, and we're gonna come back to that in a second. If you notice in the corner, there is a QR code. It does lead right to this presentation. There are links embedded in this presentation as well. And I believe they're gonna be uploaded to Athena at some point as well. So I'm talking about intersectionality and how we can use our students' identities to help promote literacy. As I kind of mentioned earlier, I come from a background at a school where we don't test historically very well, according to the state exams and things like that. So, to set the context, this is me. That is my classroom. That's what the back wall of my classroom looks like. Like I said, in Philadelphia, African American history is a graduation requirement. So I don't have to do a lot of the justifying the content or going over the content. Kids come into the class already having that content, but what I really need to work on is the skills. So I've been teaching social studies for 5 years, 4 of which were in Philadelphia. I've taught African American history, US history, intro to film history, and now also AP seminar, African diaspora content. So this is my school. My school is Edison High School. We are located in North Philadelphia. Our school is majority Hispanic and Latinx, about 70%, and then we're about 30% Black students. We are a Title I school, meaning that we have 100% free lunch. It's in North Philadelphia. If you are familiar with Philadelphia, you know that North Philadelphia is sometimes referred to as the Badlands or the trenches. And we are a public school, meaning that we take any and all students. And we also have some of the highest ACE scores in the district. Raise your hand real quick. Who's familiar with ACE scores? Okay, so a few people. ACE scores are adverse childhood experience scores. They're basically ways that we can assess students' trauma and what kind of trauma they're walking in with. So my students basically max out the ACE score, meaning that they probably have a family member that is incarcerated, or they have a single parent home, or they've experienced a death in their family, so on and so forth. So I say all of this because that's very important to my students' identity. That's important when I'm teaching the African diaspora, because I have to keep that in mind. There are certain socioeconomic pressures and oppression that they already know about. I don't have to go over. They experience that every day, and I don't have to beat them over the head with it. I also put on the other side of the screen just our test scores. So Edison is that light blue shade, and then the statewide scores are the dark blue shade. So you notice that we historically underperform on standardized tests. Now, I don't necessarily love standardized tests. I don't think that they are the most important thing. However, with the Supreme Court ruling on affirmative action and things like that, I'm becoming more in tune to getting my kids to get those scores so that they have access to higher education and things like that, and maybe even scholarships and whatnot. So that is Edison High School. So what I've done, I have taken my own data and what I know about my students, and I was able to inform my practice and how to critically engage with the African diaspora. Now, because my students test very lowly, our reading is very low. In my AP seminar class, by the way, none of the kids elected to take it. They were all put into this class. I had a kid who had a 5th grade reading level, and then I had kids who had college level reading levels. So I had to figure out a way to teach AP seminar content to 30 kids and marry those ideas and make it accessible to them. So what we're gonna go over today, or what I'm gonna go over, is strategies and resources. I want to make sure that if you are teaching AP seminar this upcoming school year, I want you to walk away with something from this. And I want this to be really helpful, and I want you to keep in mind your students that need that little extra love, that extra support students. I also forgot to mention, Edison, my class in particular, was 30% English language learners. So there is also a language barrier that we had to consider. So what I really want to focus on is the idea of intersectionality. Raise your hand if you've heard of Kimberly Crenshaw. Chef's kiss. I've done this presentation before, and everyone's like, I don't know what that word is. But intersectionality is basically the way that your identities interlock, right? I identify as Black, but I also identify as a woman. I also identify as cis. There's a lot of things, and I identify as a teacher, right? There's a lot that goes into your personality. So these are just a few graphics I had some of my students draw about intersectionality to kind of warm up their idea of identity and what goes into their identity. So they came up with some things like your occupation, your gender expression, your sexual orientation, origin, sexism, classism, racism, so on and so forth. So I use intersectionality as that point to make the African diaspora apply to all of our students. We're gonna skip that for right now. So I want you to look back at your sticky note. We're gonna do a think, pair, share, because I'm a teacher. All right, I want you to think for about a minute. What does your personal identity have to do with how you learn? So look at what you wrote down on your sticky note, those 3 words that define your identity. Think to yourself, what does this have to do with your personal identity? And what does it have to do with how you learn? So I'm gonna give you guys a minute, then share out with the people sitting next to you, and I'm gonna ask for 1 or 2 volunteers to share out. All right, so talk amongst yourselves. Call on you to share out? No, it was. What does that have to do with how you learn? Oh, so you'd be fine with the lecture for 8 hours a day? Oh, right. All right, 5-second warning. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, so I would like to hear from Miss Patty, the queen. Miss Patty, what were you guys talking about? Okay, and so what does that have to do with how you learn? You have no idea. Can someone help out Patty? If you had a student that said that they are scattered and happy, what kind of lesson would you give them? Or what activity? Not a lecture. Yeah, go ahead. Okay, so yeah, maybe a step sheet, right? You would scaffold it. So that's a really important concept to have when you're teaching this class, is that every student has a different part of their identity, and you're gonna need to differentiate not only what you teach, but how you teach it as well. So our students have so much more identities, so many more identities than demographic data gives us. I could sit here and give you demographic data all day, but that's not who my students are. The African diaspora is also not a monolith. There are so many different ways to explore it, and so many students can grab onto certain parts of it. And that is where intersectionality comes in, and that's why it's so important to know who your students are. So I take it into 3 different steps. I pre-planned for the course. I included strategies to affirm and build knowledge of the African diaspora, and then I am a big supporter of resource sharing and how to share resources. So what I did when I was planning this course is I identified areas that I needed to build. Like I mentioned, my students already had content knowledge, so I knew, and I was also their African American history teacher, so I knew what I had taught them. But I knew that we needed extreme help in academic writing, formal citations, presentation skills. So I had to create lessons and units that got my students to those skills by the time task 1 was due. So for example, one of the first things that students had to overcome was presentation skills, especially because the students that I had taught had been virtual for the past 2 years due to the pandemic. Presentations weren't really happening, or they were happening behind a screen, which is a totally different dynamic. Now they had to do it in front of their peers. So what I did is on the first day of school, I skipped all the syllabus and all the icebreakers and stuff, and I said, all right, I'm giving you a challenge. So I put students in groups of 4 or 5. I assigned them a beverage. I told them coffee, tea, water, orange juice, and I told them they had 15 minutes to create a presentation on why their beverage was the best breakfast beverage. And it was a silly, low-stakes thing. It was timed. It was 15 minutes. And everyone had to talk during the presentation. And I also leaned into the first day of school, like compliance from students. You know how students on the first day of school are less likely to like try you. So I leaned into that. And the students had so much fun with it. I had 100% participation in it. And they saw that presenting wasn't scary. And because I did that on the first day of school, whenever it came up to task 1 or task 2, I said, well, I know you can present. You just did it for me on the first day. There's no excuse. I know you can get up there. I know you can do it. You showed me that you can in a low-stakes, silly kind of way. So one way that I was able to kind of do this is, like I said, I have been at this school for 4 years. So I did know these students. I had most of these students before. So beyond just the back-to-school surveys, you need to know kind of who your students are and what they're interested in. So I know just from those students that I had previously, a lot of them had felt like when I had taught African American history, I didn't include enough queer perspectives. They didn't feel represented in that kind of way. So I knew that now I have a chance to have them again, and I'm able to include that variety of perspectives that all relate back to the African diaspora. Not only that, but because I had such varying levels in my classroom, I had to be flexible of like all the different sources. And I am so thankful for AP Seminar and the idea that it's all different kind of sources. You can use poems, you can use images, you can use videos, and of course you can have long journals that are very long-winded, and that's fine too. But there was something for everyone, which was such a beautiful thing to have at Edison. And like was mentioned all day today, talking about it. Students need to be able to process. African people of African descent are very oral people, right? We talk about things. And my students loved Socratic seminars. The way their conversations reflected such a high level of analyzation that just wasn't communicated through multiple choice tests was insane. So that's why I was so passionate about AP Seminar, because I was finally like, this is a way that my students have a chance to be tested and not have to just do the multiple choice, right? And they proved to be successful in that. So my first assignment that I gave them was the mock presentation task, because I knew that I wouldn't have time to do a mock task 1 and task 2. That would be really timely because my students had so many skills that I needed to make sure that they had when task 1 began. So I included this mock stimulus assignment. I took elements of task 1 and task 2, was able to, make it a group project so that students could do the mock assessment beforehand, practice it, see what it was like to do this, because students really hadn't done a project of this magnitude or this much research. Sorry, I'm running out of time, so I'm just kind of go fast. These are the sources that I used in my mock stimulus assignment. I included James Baldwin, the Young Lords 13-point program. I included a radio interview from like the 1970s, an article about our school, a research study, poems, and even translated poems. So in this assignment, I was able to tailor it to my students' identity and include queer voices, Afro-Latinx voices, local community voices, as well as other voices. And with these sources, we did annotated bibliographies, timed writings, individual written argument, as well as group presentations. And these were the presentations that my students came up with. And I'm not gonna lie to you, a tear was shed when they were presenting these, because they were so empowered and so emboldened to talk about things that were interested in them. So one student presented on Beyond the Black and White, Differing Lives in America, so the everyday life of Black and white Americans. Another group did the discrepancy in funding, and they used our school as an example. And they said, our school, which is, again, black and brown, there's literally no white kids at our school. And they talked about how there is this system that favors suburbia. And it's so wild, and it leaves them out of it. And then another group went into stereotypes and preconceived notions. Another group talked about waste colonization and how that affects the Caribbean and how that affects certain marginalized communities as well. So, action steps, what can we walk away with? So what I have included here, because I know I'm running low on time, is resources. If you scan this QR code, it's gonna take you to a Google Doc with my syllabuses on there, other activities I've used in this class that were really successful. Some student examples are included on there, and all of that different kind of stuff. So I wanted to make sure that you had access. On this QR code as well is the presentation that's linked, so you guys will have access to that as well. Is that time? Yeah. Thank you.
We can allow time for one question if anyone has one. And in the meantime, Michelle, you can come on up. All right. And we'll also put this on Athena as well. So we'll make sure that everyone has access to these resources. There you go.
Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for having me here today. So my presentation is Domingos Alvarez, an analysis of power and healing during the transatlantic slave trade. This text was chosen for its perspective of an enslaved West African healer. I don't want to say story, but a narrative that our students, when studying this topic, don't necessarily get. Okay? So just to give you a little bit about myself, I teach at Denver East High School. It's a neighborhood public high school, part of Denver Public Schools. Approximately 2,600 students. We're 51% white, 22% Latinx or Hispanic, and then, I forgot the stats, 16% black, okay? The district demographic is almost flipped, where we're a majority district of Latinx students. So our student population doesn't necessarily mirror the district's population. As far as AP, we have a very successful AP program at our school. However, our AP program is extremely white. And so when I got to East High School 6 years ago, I joined a student group. In our student body, I'm sure like most of y'all out there, our students are very active, okay? And they brought some concerns to the school and the teachers about the segregation that they felt within the classes that we offer at our high school. And so one of the things that I decided to do is I was also sick and tired of people just talking about the problem and not actually doing anything to fix it. Year after year is like the same complaints, right? And so my buddy of mine told me about this class that was being piloted, and I was like, oh, this is great. This is something that I can do to hopefully help change the problem that our students are identifying. So it's definitely the reason why I brought this program to East was to hopefully fix an issue that the students had. Okay. Trying to think what else. Sorry. 20 minutes isn't a long time, so I want to make sure if you all have questions, feel free to come grab me after the conference. So I take a very historical approach to this class. I'm finishing up my master's in history currently on race and ethnicity, so history is my passion. And so I attack this course through history, right? I want to hopefully show the students that the field of history is thriving, right? There's a lot of work being done to kind of decenter the European or Western narrative of history, and so I try to do that through this class. So I use LeGarrette King's Black historical consciousness as a critical framework, and specifically for this particular lesson, Principle 2, with agency, resistance, and he actually changed perseverance to justice. And then principle 3, Africa and the African diaspora. I also try to employ kind of Conrad's global history approach, which kind of decenters that Eurocentric view of global history and the connections. And then I use Triot's Silencing the Past. So my students prior to this lesson have learned about like historical agency, the power and production of archives, the way history is written. So I really center kind of these frameworks when trying to create lessons for my students. So this lesson that I'm going to be kind of walking you guys through is in my 3rd unit of the year on colonialism and the struggle for survival. Okay? And I just kind of gave you a sprinkling of some of my essential questions. But for my lesson objectives, the first objective here is students will identify and explain central themes and main ideas presented in a text. This is very much rooted in EOCA, right? That first question that asks for the main ideas of the authors. The second one is students will engage in meaningful discussions. So I really want the kids to talk. I want them to kind of take these academic risks with a challenging text. I want them to feel comfortable sharing their ideas with their peers, right? And then I also want them to think very critically, like thinking about the consequences of colonization. How has that impacted the history that we're learning? And then challenging those narratives through the story of Domingos Alvarez. So 6 to 7 class periods for one kind of lesson. I think, you know, if you don't have the time, you could definitely shorten some of these activities that I have. But I thought after doing this last year, the Socratic seminar was so strong that I felt it was worth taking the time and really diving into this text, okay? So I have 3 parts, which I misnumbered. First is the analysis of the text itself. And so we go through the story of Domingos Alvarez. We analyze James Sweet's introduction. It's a really well-written introduction of his manuscript, and then we take various excerpts. We prepare for a Socratic seminar. I have a form that the students fill out, and then the culminating activity is the actual seminar itself. Okay. I would say most of my class periods, those 6 to 7 class periods, 5 of them are diving into the text, okay? Because I want to make sure that the students are reading it, they're understanding it, they're talking about it, so that way they can come and have a full class discussion. This isn't an easy book to read. I read this in grad school. But I tell the students, I want you to take that risk and feel comfortable just trying it, right? It's not high stakes. You know, we're having a discussion. I'm not testing you on it. You're not writing a paper on it. I want to see what ideas you can pull out of it. And so we start off with, on the OER website, there's a little graphic novel. So I have the students work with that. And then part of their graphic organizer that they fill out, which we'll leave up, we can go back to the front page and you guys can access all the handouts. But they just do like a short little mapping activity that traces the different journeys and places that Domingos was. And so we start with that. Then I have the students read the entire introduction. So I do a couple strategies. When I taught in Chicago, I was AVID coordinator, so I use a lot of AVID strategies in my AP seminar class. Every time the students read something, we mark the text and write in the margins. I do this with all my students' classes, freshmen to seniors. I have like the highlighters, I bring them colored pens, and I just put them out there and we go through that. So marking the text, I have them number the paragraphs because when they're in discussion, right, they're gonna refer to a certain paragraph number and then the students can kind of see where they're referencing. I have kids circle terms or words, key terms or words they don't know. And so I really try to model for the students when we're reading these academic journals, and there's always one in that stimulus packet that the kids are definitely not gonna attack. I tell them it's okay, just circle it and Google it. I do it all the time, okay? And then I have them highlighting key details. And I try to have them do just phrases. I mean, we all know if you tell a kid to highlight, and it's like the entire paragraph. So I'm like, don't highlight a full sentence. It doesn't have to be all connected, right? And then we do writing in the margins. And so there's different ways that you can have the kids. I usually do, what is the main idea, or a question that you have, like a wondering. And I keep it short, 3-5 words max. Like, we're not writing a dissertation. And then after the introduction, I had a small group kind of discussion. You know, what is or where is Sweet's thesis? What is he trying to argue? In this introduction, he has a little bit about the historiography and the problems with sources, right? He's writing about 18th century enslaved West African, right? There's not a lot of sources out there, so he's piecing it as a historian, right? How do we piece together primary sources, oral histories, to create a narrative for our readers, right? And so I really like the way Sweet approaches the introduction of this book. And then when we get to the excerpt, the kids are going to be doing this in small groups. So the first thing I always have them do is like the main idea, and I really stress first semester, like, we're going to be focusing on EOC-A and EOC-B, and that's it, right? We're going to bring in some skills that they're going to need for the performance tasks, but I just want to get them learning as much content as possible during that first semester. And then the second question I have kids ask or think about is, how does this excerpt reinforce or challenge our notions of enslavement in the Atlantic world? Okay. So again, right, as a historian, especially in the field today, we're trying to create different perspectives. And so the kids will do this together. My seminar class is extremely collaborative. I don't really grade a whole lot. I make sure I walk around that they're doing this. But I'm really trying to also break the kids away from having to grade every single thing, right? You're in this class because something about the course title intrigued you to be in my class, so we're gonna learn to learn, right? And then hopefully by the content that you're learning first semester, you're gonna create some good research questions and papers that I actually wanna read second semester, okay? So we spend about 2 days. I have about 8 excerpts that the kids read through. They work together, they question it. Again, this piece is very much trying to get the kids to take those academic risks and make a peer-reviewed history book not scary, right? I do have varying levels of students in my classes, and so I want to make sure, I tell them, like, this is going to be the hardest thing you read, right? But if you can do this, like, the rest of the class is going to be a breeze. As far as the preparation for the Socratic seminar goes, I do have a handout. I talk to them about kind of what the purpose of the Socratic seminar is. You know, we're not debating, we're diving deeper into text, we're using evidence to support our ideas, you know, getting the kids to go back to the marking of the text and say, hey, you know, in excerpt 4, paragraph 2, you know, Sweet writes this. And so getting them to go back to the evidence and then use the evidence in their discussion. And part of the preparation sheet, I just asked them to give a summary. I have them identify 3 interesting quotes, and I have them write 3 questions. And so I try to get the kids to write at varying levels. I usually use COSTAs because it's just 3 levels, and it's a lot easier for the kids to remember. And then I end with a post-discussion reflection. So very simple, like, hey, what did you learn? What was something interesting that your classmates talked about? Or I have folks, you know, and we all do that, don't like to talk in front of groups. I get very nervous in my seminar grad classes because I'm not always comfortable sharing my ideas. And so I ask them, if you didn't have a chance to say something, what would have you added to the conversation? And so I have them do that because I'm not going to put anyone out for, you know, not talking. I totally get it. And then my favorite part of this is the actual seminar itself. I always do a pilot co-pilot format, and the co-pilots, I give them Post-it notes. And so if it's up to you, if you want to stay a co-pilot, but if your pilot is saying something and you're like, oh, I have this question, or I want to add this, they can pass their Post-it notes, or they just jot down notes, because I tend to have the conversation for about 10 minutes. I pause, and then I have the pilots and co-pilots meet up, and then they can either switch, or they can discuss what their notes on their Post-it was. So everyone's contributing in some way, right? And since this is kind of fairly early in the semester, they might not have the confidence to kind of speak up, but I can see like there's kids always like writing and being engaged that way. And so I guess, so a couple pictures. The top picture, so I typically have groups like 3 to 4. My student teacher from last year, helping out the kids. And then the Socratic seminar, this is me just like in the back. Like seminars are great, right? Because all we have to do is sit and listen, right? And I think that's the biggest thing is we want to like interject. But if you just sit, then you like don't feel the need to interject as much in the discussion. But the kids always bring it back. Even if you think it's like going into left field, there's always that one kid and you're like, oh yes, right? They brought the conversation back. And so my camera was over here, but like just, you know, I'm like, I remember this moment and like, it was so cool to have the students kind of like watching and listening to each other and like diving into the text. This is taken from a video. There, you know, kids are writing on their Post-it notes. So I guess my biggest takeaway, and I feel like I've totally rushed through this, so I apologize. One is, my biggest thing, I think, is encourage students to take academic risks, right? Choose a text that challenges the dominant narrative, if you can, right? I feel very fortunate and lucky to be in an academic space where I can teach whatever I want. I could bring to my students literally anything, and my admin has my back, right? And then allow space for the students to collaborate. And I think that's really important because the more comfortable they feel with each other, the more likely they'll take those academic risks when they're reading something challenging. So, yeah, that was really fast. Sorry. So, yeah, I guess I usually work best if y'all just ask me some questions, but real quick on this QR code, and sorry, I'm like a mover, like my kids make fun of me all the time. On the QR code has the presentation, it has the excerpts from the book, it has the introduction to the book, it has the handout graphic organizer, the Socratic seminar prep sheet. I use the same prep sheet for every single Socratic seminar that I do in any other class. Yeah. Please ask me some questions.
How many do you just do the Socratic seminar for them to all be one day or 2 days or how about that?
So last year was the first year I did this particular book. I'm on a modified block, so I had the students 1 50-minute period do the prep sheet, whatever they didn't finish homework, and then I had a 90-minute block that we kind of like did a little bit of review, worked with your small groups. All right, and then we probably had I would say maybe 45-minute discussion, a couple breaks in there, and we switched a few times. But yeah, that's the nice thing about the block or modified. You can kind of get the whole seminar in. Whenever I do discussions in a 50-minute period, there's never enough time. So, yeah, I would consider if you didn't have a block you could probably carry it over. You know, it just depends how it goes. But the kids love this one because the ideas of power, you know, Domingos Alvarez's story, if you're not familiar with the book, he really challenges the kind of colonial hierarchy, and he is seen as a threat from the Portuguese government, right? But he uses these ideas of community and healing and spirituality and these West African traditions. And then Sweet also tells the narrative of like blending of cultures and that interaction. So it's very much a book on you know, even though it says like intellectual history, kind of the, what's the word? Yeah, kind of the integration, the connectiveness. Sorry, I had a hell of a year last year, and I just can't get my mind right. So, anyone else? All right.
All right, we have our final teacher for our workshop, Mario.
Is this on? Stand up. Stand up. I think we're experiencing carb issues. So what I would like you to do is, even though you may know them, turn to a neighbor and I don't tell them a very short bad joke. Let's get the energy going. Yeah, that's enough. Okay. See, there we go. That's beautiful. Look at those smiles. Okay, so my name is Mario Herrera, and there's a couple of things I've noticed with the presentation so far that I hope you're taking away. The first thing is the class really gets to depend upon you as the teacher. You bring your strengths to it, and I think that could get rid of some of the nervousness that you may have with trying something new. The fact that you're here tells me that this is something that you're interested in. Secondly, it's also very student-focused. And we don't get to do that a lot, right, in core classes. We don't get to do that sometimes in our schools. So this is an opportunity to create something that truly is unique to you and to your school and students. So I just wanted to mention that fact. So I titled this Learning What We Don't Know because that's what a student of mine, the first year I taught this particular curriculum, that's what she said. I said, you look like you're excited with class. And she smiled and she said, yes, because we're learning what we don't know. And I had never thought of it that way. And because of the location of my school, that was really important. And that's why I decided to kind of title this Inspiration and Aspiration. Because I teach in Atlanta, Georgia at Midtown High School. We had a name change recently. I'll get to that in a moment. And I moved from Albuquerque. And when I moved from Albuquerque to Atlanta, I just kept looking around, not sure something was off. I couldn't figure it out. And I realized, oh, wow, there are no Native Americans. That was my reality. And all of a sudden, I'm moving to Atlanta where I have to learn a whole new culture that we didn't have. And so as a result of that, I realized I had a lot of work to do. I had a lot, and it was exciting. It was really exciting to me. When I got to Atlanta, it was Grady High School. We were a magnet program, and we have been through 5 different iterations of whatever APS has decided to give us on that particular year. And the reason that that's important is because when I got there, we were 70% African American and about 20% white, and the rest was mixed. That is completely flipped. Due to gentrification, due to changes in the Atlanta area. And so that was really important to me to have this because all of a sudden, okay, I know that Rachel and Rushi are here, but let's be honest. A lot of our schools across the country, when it comes to AP programs, are white. And so trying to figure out how to include this type of curriculum is important. I've had so many rich conversations with Kerry because he's in the same type of school almost in Alabama, and so the politics, the realities are different. What made me decide to choose is Rushi's fault. He was at Grady High School. He said African diaspora curriculum, and like I said, I eavesdrop. I'm really good at it. And so I literally chased him down the hall. And he kept talking, and so he doesn't really remember this because it was probably traumatic. And I stood in front of him and said, I want that. How are we a pilot school? How do I do that? And he smiled, the little Rushi smile, and he kept walking, and I know, how do we do this? And so it was important because of the whole idea of the African diaspora is location, location, location. We were Henry W. Grady High School. We are now Midtown. We are 2 miles away from the King Center. We have a wonderful little street that runs parallel to the school called Ponce de Leon. That's going to make important sense when you realize that's where the red line is. We're on Monroe. You cross Ponce, it becomes Boulevard. On the other side, it's Charles Allen Park. You cross Ponce, you're on Parkway. We have around the corner state housing, well, public housing, new development, $1.5 million, condos, public housing. So, and I think that's happening a lot across the country. So the location was important. Yolanda King, Dr. King's daughter, went to Henry W. Grady High School, and no one knew. So it was really important to use this, and we chose to use it at Midtown High School in the mock TMP. You heard me say this before, why am I just learning about this now? I think that's what worked really, really well. What did not work, and if you can tell, I'm taking a big picture at this. I'm just choosing to do that because, well, I can. Scaffolding, I cannot stress that enough. Even if it makes sense to you, if you do not hold students' hands sometimes when they have new information, they may do it, that doesn't mean they've internalized it. Always feel free to scaffold, and what I mean by scaffolding is give them that step-by-step approach like we were talking about. Make sure they understand and have them repeat back the instructions. And even if you think that scaffolding is too much, you can probably scaffold even more. The biggest success that we've had using the African American diaspora curriculum is very simple. We do it as our mock. It's our mini unit. I'll explain how we do that. But in the performance tasks 1 and 2, on their own, they are choosing those topics. And 90% of my classes are not students of color. The very fact that they are drawn to it, the very fact that they want to continue it on their own, in my mind, is a success story. Because they literally have the world to choose from, but they're choosing to go this particular direction. I cannot stress videos enough. I know as teachers we hate them. It's not reading. The TikToks are 40 seconds. It's the hook. It's what they need. And to ignore that, I think it makes our jobs harder. The one skill that they have that they're better at than we are is video. Absolutely, right? Absolutely. But you know what skill they don't have that we have? Listening. So you've got to pair that together with the video so that they have something to hook on to. They love infographics. Do you know why? They're colorful. And they're short. So have them make their own infographics. Song lyrics. Oh, the songs that I know about that I probably shouldn't as a result of this is phenomenal. But again, it gives me a clue of where they're coming from. EBSCO, obviously, political think tanks, Athena, 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 Athena. Write that website down. Contribute to that website. It is our community when it comes to this curriculum. Teach Athena. I can't stress that enough. And political think tanks. Political think tanks, I think we ignore often because they're political, that they're thoroughly researched. You just have to, embrace the bias. So the biggest lesson that I've kind of realized is that occurs with this particular curriculum is students think that what they know is correct. And so when they get new information, they aren't necessarily readjusting what they think they know. So I start off the curriculum with Plato's Allegory of the Cave. And we read the text, we watch the video. I mention an article from the New York Times that connects Allegory of the Cave with drug abuse. And we have that discussion. And then we move on to Allegory of the Cave with COVID and how that responds to people of color. I then move that to, okay, let's go to a philosophical journal and talk about that. And all of a sudden, to them, it just makes sense, although they've now increased the type of the Lexile scores. I trick them. And I'll be honest, one argument that works really, really well is they'll come up to me and they know something. Well, Mr. Earl, this is what I've heard. That's interesting. Why are you saying that's interesting? I didn't think you were the type of person to let other people think for you. How dare I? Okay, fine, prove me wrong. Fine, what's the name of that database? Score. And this is the door to get into that for me. Then we create stimulus materials, just like other speakers have said. I think that's a really great idea to introduce both performance tasks 1 and 2. And I have settled on the theme of inspiration. Here's why. And I have, many of you in this room know her, Ronisha Blaché. She said something to me once. She said, Mario, when you are teaching your students about this, remember the joy. Because I think what happens too often is that we are victims of mass media, just like our students are. And to only see any type of person in one way is frightening and is unacceptable. So we decided to go with this idea of inspiration. The reason we are now Midtown High School is because we decided that probably having a school named after a former editor of the Atlanta Constitution who had no problem with publishing lynchings on his front page, it was time to move on. The students decided that, and they also decided to go with a geographic location because, as one student put it, humans are messy and I don't want to deal with it anymore. Because if you're from the South, you know the South loves to name things. This bottom article is something we're using this year. The global economy's future depends on Africa. I can guarantee you my students have not heard that. They'll have no idea what that means. And I want to challenge what they think they know. Africa is a dark continent. There's $3 on it and not many people. So let's figure out ways to challenge that. We're going to use a couple of different pieces of literature. Hair, the poem by Elizabeth Acevedo, and Dead Men's Path by Chinua Achebe. We're including that because we become an English class this year. On that note, Mario's commentary. The reason that I absolutely love this class is because it allows students to make mistakes and rebound. It lets them become scholars. So much emphasis is put on test scores, even with this class. But the bottom line is, if you can get students motivated, if you can get them to read because they want to be the expert, if you can get them to write so that anyone can understand their communication, they're going to get a qualifying score. They're going to embrace this idea of new knowledge, and what a perfect way to do it through this particular curriculum, because it's something that every student can attach to, and every person on some level has experience with. So this is how we do that particular part of the curriculum, and then, so these are pieces of art that were created by students based upon the stimulus packet that their team created. And the one on the very left, you can't really see it, but it's three-dimensional, and those eyes are sewn shut. And that was created by a group of African-American students who, as they were reading more and more about the diaspora, were like, what I'm seeing in the world is not really in the world. So they chose to make that particular piece. The bottom one was by a group of, I call them Du Bois, because they, bless their hearts. Mr. Era, who's more swole? Really? That's the question we have. That's the question we have. But they created this bottom one. And they were shocked that the South still has Confederate flags all over the place. It hit them in ways that they didn't realize they wanted to express. They have to show that interconnectedness for this art project. It's not just art also. Some made newscasts, others attempted to create what in some circles might be called music. And definitely there was poetry as well. So even though the stimulus packet really does deal with, just like it was in part 2, the art component allows them that expression that they're feeling, right? Teenagers, they like the feels. And this allows for that. So it mirrors what they're doing academically as well, because they take that stimulus material just like in part 2, but instead of the individual finding a topic based upon themes, it's the group. And as a result of that, there is discussion on several levels about possible topics, because you have 4 or 5 people in a group, and all of a sudden they're having to assess, what are we going to do, what's most important, how can we approach this, and that team component, which is so necessary in the actual part 1, starts to take fruition in November instead of in February. I kind of just want to end with this. These were not the final topics or research questions, but I wanted to let you see what they came, the past couple of years, what they've come up with. The first one, 2 of those students were in charter schools before they came to Midtown. And when they kind of saw what was going on with education, and they looked at themselves, they went home to their parents to talk about it. And they came back to their group and said, we really think that this is something that we should do. The second one, I think, really kind of stems from AP Human Geography. I really suggest that you connect with that. If it's we do a seminar in sophomore year, Human Geography freshman year. It's a fantastic way to enrich your topics if you kind of like invoke what they've learned. And the third one is the direct result of an Atlanta Journal-Constitution article that said that the state of Georgia still has the highest maternal mortality rate for African American women in the country, and they simply could not understand why. When students can get involved with the issues that are happening down the street, and they realize that even though that street may not look like their street, it sure connects to it. That's, I think, the most important step that this curriculum can bring. And then I'll just end with this. So I don't know why I didn't think about this before. I'm adding a lens.
There's nothing that says we can't add lenses. For the last couple of years, we've added a global lens, we've added a communication lens, we've added a technology lens. I'm going to start implementing a lens of marginalized people. Because I think the moment that you allow for that, not mandate it, don't tell kids what to do. Tell them what they can't do, and then they'll do it. So if they choose to kind of look through that lens, without realizing it, that lens is going to attach itself to every other lens. And that's the point. I don't think that the African diaspora theme should be isolated. I think it should inform what we do as teachers, because the class allows us to inform our students in that particular manner. This is my favorite class. I coach high school speech and debate. I've been coaching that since God was a child. I started 40 years ago when I was a freshman in high school. I love it. It's what I do. I love this class. I love this class. I really hope that what you're taking away from today is this. This curriculum is cool. This curriculum allows you to be who you are and then some. Students watch us. They see what our process is. They try to figure out how to make us happy, but also to challenge us. What better way than through a lens that says, let's look at what we've done, let's look at where we are, and let's see where we're going, because you, Generation Z, soon to be Generation Alpha in our high schools, you're the ones that are going to push us forward. So, thank you very much for your time.